So my role here at HashiCorp is to help with strategic advisory and making sure that customers understand the product offering, what we do, and how that works then within large-scale enterprises, whether that's secrets management, infrastructure as code, and really understanding the business value and what the driving factors are for adopting some of these toolings and these solutions so that they can really run a more efficient business and leverage their IT capabilities like they should be able to. So the last time I spoke with you, we talked a little bit about fast secrets and what does that mean. Just to recap a little bit, I believe that when we have secrets management across the board, we need to be really careful about how fast that iteration is, and that iteration of the secret and how long that secret is around should more closely match what the iteration speed of the actual infrastructure is. So if I have a Kubernetes pod that's only good for, 5 seconds, then my secret should probably only be good for 5 seconds and be generated with each new pod. If I have something that's a little bit longer lived, it's more acceptable to have that longer lifespan. But we really need to be taking that into account as an industry, and how does that work, and what are the implications then on our security posture and also our architectural standpoint. For me, Vault is a lot more than a secret manager, and I believe that really the power of Vault lies in identity brokerage and being able to map multiple identities to other multiple identities. This is something we've done a lot with SSO over the years, but it's something we haven't really responded to as an industry. What we need to start looking at, especially with microservices, Kubernetes, is really how do we map these identities together, and how can we make sure that if we need to have shared services, we can do that in a way that's secure and not, and identity-based, making sure that we authenticate and authorize everything at each point in time. So one of the statistics that I've seen across the board is that about 20% of all breaches have an initial foothold of a credential breach, which means that we need to get a lot better at secrets management and that authentication information. How are we using it? And when it is breached, I think then the really important part of that is how do we remediate that and how do we recover from that? Because we know that as we get broader, as cloud native becomes more of a thing and we start leaning a little bit more towards this zero trust idea, that we need to be able to understand if somebody is in the system or when somebody is in the system, how do we recover from that and how do we remediate it? How do we make our infrastructure a little bit more immutable? And that also holds true with anything that's authentication related. So secrets, credentials, things like that. Zero trust is this idea that over the years we've been dealing with really static infrastructure. It's something we've set, forget, moved on. We were dealing with physical perimeters, so people couldn't actually access the inside of the building unless they were given specific authentication or specific permission to enter the building. And then things were tied to IP addresses. So a lot of our security controls, whether that's firewalling or even just some sort of scanning, is very much tied to individual IP addresses. But now as we've expanded into the cloud, we've started flattening networks. We're using logical perimeters, which means we're dependent on humans not to make mistakes. We're understanding that attackers are probably on the network, and that's kind of accepted just by the industry as a standard. And what we really need to do now is say, okay, we know people are on the network. How do I now protect my resources? And what are my resources to begin with? So looking at potentially the 5 pillars of CISA or the 7 pillars of NIST and understanding, what those resources are. And then we can go a little bit farther and say, okay, we think that there are really 4 areas where we need to address this topic of zero trust. The first one being just human identity, which is something we've done for years, things like single sign-on. On the other side, machine identity, which is one of the reasons we have Vault, so that we can provide a machine identity to different things and they can use that for authentication and authorization further down the line. And then looking at how do we do secure machine-to-machine communication, so things like console, service mesh, making sure that we have that MTLS in place and that any sort of communication between services is really based off of intentions. So I know that service A wants to talk to service B. It's no longer now about IP X needs to talk to IP Y. It can be changeable, variable, and deal with this dynamic infrastructure and still have that elevated encryption in transit or at rest. And then also making sure that we have adequate privileged access management, and that privileged access management isn't just about how do I securely access the network, it's more about how do I securely access only the resources that I have access to. So things like boundary in our case. We want to make sure that developers have the principle of least privilege, can access what they need to, and really nothing more, and definitely not have access to the network, which would allow for some sort of lateral movement and an attack to be exploited in that sense. If we look at the HashiCorp portfolio, what we really have and what we look at it as is dividing it into security and productivity. We want to make sure that we're enabling security in a way that's developer-centric, so you can still maintain that same velocity, but have that centralized control that you need to have. And then on the other side, how can we make our developers as productive as possible? And the way that we've kind of conceived of our suite is that anytime you want to use two of our products, we'll say 1 + 1 = 3, essentially. The value that you derive from using two objects in combination with each other, or two of our tools in combination with each other, is greater than if you just use them individually. But that we also recognize that on the market there are golden standards that we're plugging into more brownfield environments. So we also want to make sure that it's adaptable. And for us, it's really about the workflow. We want to ensure that organizations can maintain that workflow and augment what they're doing, their productivity, their operations, based off of what they already have in play. So yes, you get maybe a little bit more value if you're having, or if you use multiple tools, but you can still use your golden workflow. What excites me about secrets management? On the consumer side, people are becoming a lot more aware of it. They're understanding what the value of it is and how it should be used. So for me as a technician, I'm really interested in seeing how companies start leveraging this. On the HashiCorp side of things, I'm really excited to see how we start developing secrets management as more of a secrets management lifecycle idea, so that things can really come together, everything from maybe, that detection side of things all the way through dynamism, and making sure that putting secrets management into place is something that's really easy and allows developers really to maintain that velocity.